Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a DNFs, library saves, unhaul, and haul. And most of those are pretty straightforward and you've probably seen a version of before, but if you don't know what library saves are, pretty self-explanatory. It's where I go through a list of things that I have checked out from the library over the last few months. And I know that this isn't the most informative, it doesn't necessarily tell you about the books or my thoughts on them, but one, because this is kind of something I like to do to bookend a certain amount of time, so in this particular case it's like a bookend to the first half of the year, it does give you a heads up of a bunch of things that I've probably already talked about. In case you missed certain wrap-ups or reviews, I'll have those linked. But I like doing this because it just goes to show how much is available at the library, and it's a nice reminder that libraries exist, which is pretty obvious, but every now and then if we get kind of caught up in going to bookstores, buying books, buying special editions, it's good to remember that libraries are also core parts of our communities. So a bunch of stuff I access through the library almost exclusively for this year. They've been audiobooks. So we have 9 Goblins by T. Kingfisher, Left Hand of Darkness. Left Hand of Darkness was through specifically the app Hoopla. So my library system has Libby and Hoopla. The way that Libby works is that it treats it as if it's almost like a physical copy. So if there is somebody who is listening to that, then you have to wait the same way you would for a physical copy. Whereas Hoopla, you are allowed a certain amount of downloads a month, which is a pretty high amount in the area I live in. And you can just listen to as many as those are, whatever that number is for your particular area. So I have found that Hoopla is really great for backlist works, and then Libby is better for newer releases. The only downside is you usually have to wait a bit. Regardless, there are a decent amount of backlist books that I was able to check out through Hoopla. Left Hand of Darkness is one of them. I already had the physical copy of this, so I was able to listen to the audiobook through Hoopla and immersion read, because that was one where I wanted to listen and read at the same time, because I wouldn't say it's necessarily dense in the sense that you don't know what's happening or you're confused or anything like that. I just think it's one of those works that's very thought-provoking, and so I find helpful to have both things to lock in, for myself anyway. I lock in the best if I'm immersion reading. I've said this before, I used to think immersion reading made me feel like I was a small child where I have to look at the book and listen to someone read it to me, but really it's helpful to not have distractions because you have that there. Some people like to listen to music while they read. For me, it depends on the book. I'm not going through this list very fast. Sorry. I'll just get back to this in a moment. Just talking about immersion reading for a second. I find that while some books I can have music on, a lot of times it's helpful for me to have the audiobook and read physically, especially if it's kind of high fantasy or it's hard sci-fi, something like that. It's beneficial, especially for reviewing purposes, for me to be as focused as possible. So anyway, I already had the physical copy of Left Hand of Darkness, and I was able to listen to the audiobook through the library. That was so much more information than you needed. Next up, The Court of Broken Knives, Paladin's Strength and Paladin's Hope. 2 Like the Lightning. That one I definitely needed to immersion read for, especially because there is a lot of 18th century philosophy and a lot of it is French, and I was not going to be able to even mentally pronounce any of that correctly. Frankenstein and Wuthering Heights, I did immersion reading for both of these, so the audiobooks I was able to check out through Hoopla. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, Monday's Not Coming, Only for the Weak, Sisters in Arms, The Ballad of Black Tom, Such a Fun Age, The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door, Slippery Creatures, The Unicorn Hunters. That one was through Libby because it wasn't available via Hoopla. But I was really surprised. I did not think I was going to be able to listen to the audiobook for that one for months, but luckily I apparently was one of the first people in line in my region. The Dragon and the Sun Lotus and The Last Tiger. The Last Tiger is the only one on this list that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet, but I thought I would go ahead and mention it because it is something that I was able to check out through the library recently. And then as far as physical copies go, I actually haven't checked out that many physical copies from the library as of late, as I'm kind of trying to work through a lot of books either that I have ebooks for or physical copies that I already own. So, or there's the third option, which is just that I listened to it and I didn't have a physical in any fashion. So some of the ones that are more like romances and stuff like that, I don't always necessarily need to immersion read. So for physical though, Her Hidden Fire, and then Cuba and American History. So libraries are fantastic. I'll segue into DNFs. So I actually don't have a lot of DNFs this quarter, which I'm really grateful for. I only really have one, and that would be The Shattered Spires. And I fortunately didn't even really DNF it because I couldn't stand it or I was so bothered by it or anything like that. It was one of those books where I was listening to it for a while, reading it physically for a little bit, and technically I also checked out the physical copy from the library, but it was one of those works where I could have just kept going with it, and I could tell that my feelings for it were probably not going to change that much by the end, and it would just end up being a book that I finished just to say I finished. And whenever that happens, I don't really even feel like that's fair to the book. And I definitely think the comp title is pretty accurate. It was essentially marketed as a YA version of Gideon the Ninth. I think that's very, very specific, but very accurate. So if that sounds appealing to you, then I would say give this one a try. I could see right away how tonally that matched, and also just the way that the characters were behaving and things like that. But I think part of what makes Gideon work is the fact that it's adult, because some of the humor and some of the way that things land, having that little bit of edge makes it feel that much sharper and sometimes ridiculous, whereas when it's YA, it kind of has to hold back a little bit. Not to say that all YA books have to hold back by any means, but in this book's case, I do think there was a little bit of that. But still, if you like the idea of maybe Gideon the Ninth, but held back a tiny bit, then I could see this one working. And the magic system seemed pretty cool. The world was interesting. So there were plenty of aspects to this that I thought were well developed. It just wasn't quite clicking for me. But as far as DNFs go, that's really the only one. And sometimes I talk about series I'm DNFing, but I was thinking about it, I'm like, I don't think I'm DNFing any of the series that I've been reading over the last 6 months, which is really exciting, but also almost a little frustrating, because part of it is just like, oh, I want to work through some of the books that I have, some of the backlist things I have, and all I'm doing is I'm adding even more series to check out. So in that sense, that's a little bit of a bummer, because you like seeing the numbers go down, and for me now it's just going up. But I guess the number of things that I own that I've read, that's gone up. Now getting though into an unhaul. These first books that I want to mention, I'm by no means unhauling because I didn't like them. In fact, I love these, but one of them was very, very damaged, and because I love them so much, sometime last year I just treated myself to getting different editions of these. So that would be Talon Sister and Titan Child by Jen Williams. If you know my taste, you know that this author, not only have I continued to like the things that she's written, but they're more than just I love her epic fantasy. I think it's fantastic, including these. When I got this, because it had to be shipped in from the UK, I was like, oh, I can't really go and return it. But this is more than just a little rip here. This was kind of I don't think I'm usually very fussy, but that's kind of a big deal. So I was like, oh man. And then I just was like, whatever, it's fine. You won't see it when it's on the shelf. But then every time I would go to clean the shelves, which I live in Arizona, and it's always dusty. It doesn't matter how much you dust. It's always dusty. So periodically I'm taking the books off the shelves. Oh, because I'm being chatty in this video, I have to say, I saw somebody talking about this dehumidifier for your bookshelves that you can put behind your books so they don't get moldy or the pages don't stick together. And I was like, that is not a problem where I live. It's the opposite. It's just dust coating everything. And I think I'd take the dust, if I'm being honest. I don't think I would like dealing with smelly, moldy books. That sounds awful. So even though I complain about the heat quite often on a channel that has nothing to do with going outdoors, I'll take the heat and the dust for my book's sake over that. That sounds terrible. Every time I dust, returning to what I was saying, every time I dust and I go to put it back, I'm like, oh shoot, because I'm always worried I'm going to damage it even more than it already is. And because these were not only two of my favorite books that I read last year, but they're some of my favorite books of all time for the fantasy genre, I was like, well, I'll go ahead and upgrade them. So I did, and they finally had shipped in, and they're on the shelf. I just rearranged my shelf, so they're around. But I'm gonna go ahead and take these in, probably to my local Bookman's, because Changing Hands, usually they like them a little more pristine. So these might be Bookman's books. Next up, we have To Ride a Rising Storm, and similar to the previous two, not getting rid of this because I didn't like it or anything, but I had pre-ordered this because it is book 2 in a series that I was definitely going to be continuing and that I already owned a copy of the first book for. So I knew I was going to want this book. I try not to pre-order things unless it is a sequel or it's one of my favorite authors. In this book's case, I had pre-ordered it, and then the publisher sent me a copy. So I had 2 copies. So I'm just going to go ahead and take it in. And this one is in pretty pristine condition. So this one might be a Changing Hands book. I mention these bookstores quite often, but if you're new, Bookman's and Changing Hands in Arizona are both fantastic. I already said Bookman's usually sometimes has slightly more damaged books. They have a lot of trade paperbacks, they have a lot of older books, and everything in the store, for the most part, is discounted. Sometimes they get brand new things in, especially around the holidays, but most things are used, and you can just open it, and usually they'll have a pencil mark that'll tell you the price. And they also have a ton of other stuff. So they have a lot of manga, they have video games, movies, and they have instruments, so they're great to just look around at. And then Changing Hands, primarily books, and mostly new releases. You can use store credit in both of those locations, and they offer a good amount of store credit in both, but I do think that if you're looking for newer books, Changing Hands is usually better. They do have some used books, but they're better for if you want to use store credit for newer things. Bookman's better if you want to use store credit for older things. And also, Bookman's is fun to kind of do some searching around and see if you can find older editions that you can't find easily anymore or that are hard to come by, which, by the way, we'll bring that up when we get into the haul section, because I have something that irritated me about some editions of things I got recently. Anyway, so I'll probably be taking this one into Changing Hands. Next up, we have some manga that I just only have so much room in my house. And manga, as many of you know, it can really go on for a long time. And I just don't have the room to continue certain series for a really long time. So I've only just barely started the anime for JJK. And because of the fact that it's a high quality anime, I enjoy the voice actors, I enjoy the animation, and it's a pretty action heavy story, so I feel like the animation does a great job of bringing that to life. I don't know that I feel the need to read all these. I only have 0, 1, 2, so it's not like I own a bunch of them or anything, so if I ever want to go back and actually get physical copies of them, I can, but I'm not running out to collect the whole series. I don't even know if I'll like it that much anyway. Next up, we have Frieren Beyond Journey's End. I only have volumes 7, 8, and 12 very randomly, because after season 1, I picked up the manga. I got caught up beyond just where volume 12 is. I read everything that was available, which is pretty far ahead of where the anime is, and I have enjoyed it, but I do think that Frieren is one of those stories where the anime is an improvement upon the manga. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not the case, sometimes it'll be about equal, and I think I just really appreciate all of the work that the anime has done in bringing this to life, and I appreciate the source material, but I don't own all of it, and I don't need to run out and get all of it, so having this kind of in-between of just a couple random volumes, don't really need to have that either. Last for the manga, we have Tokyo Ghoul. I never finished Tokyo Ghoul. I might go back and keep going at some point, but this is definitely one that I can check out from the library, or I can use some kind of digital service. So for example, I check out Spy Family on Shonen Jump, and because I love Spy Family, then once the new volumes come out, I do get those, but then there are some that I'm okay not having the physical copies, and I can just read it online, or I can just check it out from the library. And from the little bit I've read of Tokyo Ghoul, I just don't know that I need to own all of it. If I do go back and reread it and I completely change my mind, then I can always try to find them used or on sale or something like that. But this isn't one where I feel like, oh, I'm gonna deeply regret this, especially because none of these are like really rare editions or anything like that. And even if they were, I would much rather that somebody who actually really enjoys the story to have those rare editions, and for me, who's just kind of sitting on it and not really loving it necessarily. But I'll probably come back to this series someday. It's just the typical cliche, so many books / manga and so little time, and that's kind of the case with this one currently. Next up, we have a Book of the Month book and an L'Oreal book that didn't quite work for me, and that would be Sisters in Arms and Heart's Gambit. I really liked the world building in Heart's Gambit, and I liked the concepts, but I thought that the way the characters acted and the way the plot progressed, it just didn't quite end up lining up in a way that I found as polished as I would have liked. I think rearranging certain events would have made the pacing feel a little bit better, and I think while the world was really cool, it could have been expanded on a little bit more. And then the characters, while I liked them, I did feel like the story had that very difficult conundrum that it fell into, which is just how do you balance characters falling in love when the stakes are incredibly high, and how do you make it so it doesn't feel like maybe they should take the stakes more seriously and not worry about going on what is basically like a date in the middle of the story. You know, it's one of those, and I know that can happen in all sorts of works, and in this one I think it just kind of was a little more prevalent than I prefer. Sisters in Arms, the story itself and what it was about, I was finding really fascinating. It follows Black women during World War II, Black women who ended up serving. And so I was really fascinated by this, especially because I had read the nonfiction Half American, which was fantastic, highly recommend. So I was very curious about this very specific group of people during World War II, but I didn't really feel like the story went as into that as I was expecting. It's of course a fictional version of these women, but they were real women that existed. Like, this group of women that served in World War II did exist. This is kind of a fictional version of some of the types of women you might have seen. And I just felt like it felt a little Hallmark movie, I suppose, which, given that it's a pretty difficult scenario to find yourself in, and it's a very just harrowing experience, I was surprised that we didn't maybe have a little more oomph to it. So I appreciated highlighting this, but I didn't necessarily feel like the story was, like I said, it didn't quite have the oomph that I was hoping it would. These next ones might surprise some people, but ultimately what I was saying when talking about Tokyo Ghoul, and I said, oh, even if they were special editions, I'd rather not just sit on them just because they're special editions if there's somebody else who would really like these. That is, to a T, what I would say about these ones. I really thought about it, and I'm like, I'm just holding on to these because they're beautiful, and there was a lot of work put into these, and I appreciate that, but I didn't really like them. So I'd rather somebody else have them. The first one would be Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England. This was one of the 4 original secret projects that Sanderson had put out, and it was definitely my least favorite of the 4, but if I'm being honest, I didn't really care for the Sunlit Man that much either. I thought that Sunlit Man was, I mean, I can kind of understand maybe if I were to read it later when we're further into the Cosmere, and that's what I kept telling myself of, this might be one that I appreciate more later in. But thinking about it, I was like, I don't think so, because I found the tone to not quite line up with the tone that I prefer from some of Sanderson's other Cosmere works. I do appreciate that he does approach different stories within the Cosmere differently. That's good, I think, ultimately, because while there are certain ones that are more to my preference, I really appreciate when authors take chances, when they tell stories in different ways, when they kind of push their own limits. I think that's a great thing. It just means that sometimes it's not going to fit into my taste, and Sunlit Man ultimately just didn't quite. I thought that the world building was really fascinating, but I don't know that I ever was fully engaged and invested in what was actually happening, and it had a little bit more of a lighter feel, while also feeling like reflective and reliant upon some of the other Cosmere works. It was just kind of it was a strange feeling overall for me for a Cosmere work. And then last of the 3, we have Isles of the Emberdark. Ultimately, while I appreciated the themes of this one, and again, it had Sanderson's signature world building within it, I found the themes to be quite repetitive, and they were explained a lot. So I don't mind when you have really, really obvious themes. I don't mind when you return to those themes pretty often, but then when you kind of also walk us through it, it just starts to feel, in my opinion, a bit youthful, like it can start to lean into middle grade, and that's completely fine if it is middle grade, but then some of the pieces of this felt more like it was adult. The balance, then, I would say, was just not quite what I was looking for, or you could, maybe a better way to put it is that the balance didn't quite ultimately work for me. Switching now to the book haul, and since we were just talking about Sanderson, we'll go ahead and continue. So this is somewhat related to Sanderson. It's also co-written though, or primarily written by another author, but kind of the idea behind a lot of it was from Sanderson, and that would be Songs of the Dead. This was very kindly sent to me by the publisher, so thank you to the publisher for sending it. I am very curious about this one. I'm going to avoid seeing what anybody else thinks about it. I had mentioned earlier that there was something I wanted to note about when you get different editions or other such things, and I bought these used because Daughter of the Forest, which is right here, I had found that at my local bookstore, Bookman's, and I had always wanted to read something by that author. I found that copy. It's kind of an older copy, hardback, good condition, and it was, I think, like $10, and I had store credit, and I was like, oh, perfect. I read it, loved it, loved it. One of my favorite books I picked up this year. Did a whole review if you're curious about it. And I was hoping to find the rest of the books in that specific edition, and hardbacks if I could. I knew I wasn't going to find it at Bookman's because I looked when I was there and they didn't have it. Maybe in the future somebody will have brought it in, but they didn't have it then. So I was like, okay, let me look at some of these used book sites. And I found the second and the third books, and I was like, oh, perfect. So the third one, it is technically an old library copy, but it's the same type of edition if you just kind of think of it without the shiny library part on it. But I was like, oh yay, I found it, it's in pretty good condition. And then I also found the second one, and I was like, I don't think that's the same size. And as soon as I held it up, it is most definitely not. And that is fine. I would mind it less if it wasn't the middle book. I wish it was the last one or the first one. But there's something about going tall, short, tall that is irritating to me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the story. But I specifically sought out the same edition in the same size. And I was a little bummed that it's not that. It's fine though. But eventually when these are on the shelf, it's probably just going to be the first one and the third one that are on the shelf. And I'll put this, I have other shelves in my house. I'll put this on a different shelf just because there's only so much room and I don't actually have room for all of them on this shelf. And it looks a little silly. Every time I see it, I'm going to think about it and be like, ugh, why? Why are you randomly shorter? And I'm guessing the second one is available in a normal size. So then my brain is like, why did the same one come out in two different sizes? Was this like a UK US thing? Because I know sometimes books in the UK are actually quite a bit shorter than some US ones, but usually they have a different cover. It's not usually the exact same. It doesn't matter. I could look into it and I could answer my own question. It's really not a big deal. I'm just happy to have these and to keep going with the series because I loved that first book and I loved the writing. And that's the part that I'll leave it on. This next one is exceptionally random, but I had read a book by V.E. Schwab. It was actually co-written earlier this year, The Ending Writes Itself, and I'm not somebody who typically picks up a lot of thrillers or mysteries, and not because I have anything against them, it's just a genre I'm not very well versed in. And I had asked all of you, oh hey, if you have any of your own recommendations, feel free to let me know and I'll try to find them. And I took screenshots, and when I've gone to my local bookstores, I've tried to look for some of these authors. This was not the book by this author that one of you had recommended, but it was the author. So I was like, well, they have one of them. Maybe I'll give this one a try. And I hope it's not one of these like, oh no, the other one I recommended is really good by that author, but that's their worst one. That one sucks. Hopefully that's not the situation. But the author is Lisa Jewell, and the book is The Family Upstairs. I found it used at Changing Hands. It was $9.50. So I went ahead and got this, and I hope, like I said, that it's not this author's lesser enjoyed book, and I hope to like this, and I hope also to like it, not just for my sake, but because it'd be great since one of you recommended it to me. And then also kind of random, I've talked about this book, I read it recently, and I really enjoyed it, just Wolfworm. I mean, I like T. Kingfisher, I was excited about this one, I had pre-ordered this one, and I got it. I really liked this one. I think T. Kingfisher, I've read so many of her books at this point, that Some I like more than others, which I'm on repeat saying every time I bring them up. And this is probably up there. If I were to do a tier ranking, I think this would be second or top tier for Tea Kingfisher. Maybe top. I quite enjoyed it. It was pretty disgusting because there's bug stuff in it. I hate bugs. I hate them so much. I hate them so much. When we had mold in our bathroom, which I was talking about how things are dry, but we actually have had a mold situation at one time. It was in our bathroom, and we had to have the whole ceiling taken out. They had to have one of those really loud things that just is constantly trying to dry it out, and you have to let it run, and it's obnoxious, but, you know, it's for trying to repair. And then for a long time, they were like, oh, we'll have our guys come out and then put in a new ceiling for you and put in everything, right? And then they took forever, so then we just didn't have a ceiling in our bathroom. For months, we didn't have a ceiling. And it's like, when is this going to happen? When are you guys going to get this together? And because of the fact that we didn't have a ceiling in our bathroom, cockroaches were getting into our house. And they were disgusting. And there was one time that I was going to the bathroom, and then I reached to grab some toilet paper, and it was on the roll of toilet paper. And it just, like, traumatized me. That's a really dramatic. I should not use the word traumatized to describe that situation. It was disgusting, though, and I freaked out because it was, like, right there, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, you poor thing, let me escort you outside. I'm not that person, so I was very upset by that, and I did not like it. But anyway, eventually, we got our ceiling in our bathroom. And then, what do you know? We stopped getting them all in our bathroom. But it was for a while. It was like, I had a period of time also after, this is sad, but after my dad died, which, by the way, the day I'm filming this would have been his birthday, so I'm a little sad today. But anyway, so there was a little period of time, a pretty long period of time after he passed away, where my sleep schedule was way, way off for grief-related reasons that I don't need to get into. But it meant that I was staying up really late all the time, and I wasn't sleeping a lot. My husband was still able to have, like, his normal schedule. He kind of had to, because he has a more routine work schedule. And the amount of nights that I would be, like, sitting up, working, reading, whatever, and I would look up, and I would just see one of these stupid cockroaches in our house. And I'd, like, run to go get my husband, and I'd be like, oh, Sean, there's a bug. And then he would, because he was half asleep, he would forget how big they were, because once you kill them, they, like, shrivel up, and they get much smaller. And when I would tell people, like, oh, this bug was huge, and I would motion how big it was, he'd be like, they weren't that big. And there was one night he was fully awake, and he saw how big it was, and he's like, oh my gosh, and he freaked out. And I'm like, yeah, they're always that big, but you're just always half asleep. Anyway. So bugs. There's bugs in Wolfworm. That was the point of all of that. Next up, I mentioned that I had gotten this from the library, and I thought it was fantastic, so I wanted to have a physical copy, plus I wanted to tab it. I wanted to be able to reference back to it at a future date. So I got Cuba, an American History Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. I talked about it for a decent amount of time in a wrap-up, but only scratched the surface. If you're interested in hearing much more in-depth thoughts, I did a discussion with my husband, Sean, on my Patreon. So if you want to chat more about this, you can check that out. It's fantastic. Highly, highly, highly recommend this. And I said it when I talked about it in my wrap-up, but I now have so many other books by about Cuba, but also I would like to see if this author has other nonfiction, and I'd like to read more. I'm quite positive she does. Next up, we have this special edition of The Poet Empress. Gorgeous. This is beautiful. Great job to Illumicrate and the artists for the work they did on this. It's one of my favorite books I've picked up this year, one of my favorite new fantasy releases. So this is what the front looks like. And then the sprayed edges are exceptional, I think. And then, man, for me, this was like the star of the show, even though for maybe other people it's not their favorite part about it. But the naked hardback, I just really liked this design. I liked the colors. And then, of course, the interior, the end paper illustrations, I think are wonderful. You do have front and back ones. I just think exceptional. Wonderful. And I think there's a couple others. This is one of those where I think a lot of book boxes did special editions. And I'm like, I kind of feel like it deserves it because it's so good. And the more people that get this as a part of their subscription, the more people that have their eyes on it, and I think it deserves as much attention as possible because it's very, very good in my opinion. And then last for our haul portion, since I mentioned some manga in the unhaul, I'll mention a couple of manga things in the haul. So I've mentioned another thing that I have the Grimoire edition of Witchat Atelier. It is one of the most beautiful things I own. And the amount of extras within that are amazing. And I cannot wait for the rest of the series to come out in Grimoire editions. However, that does not mean that I'm going to be taking these in because these are also works of art. And I love this series. It is my favorite ongoing series. And someday when it's completed, it might end up being my favorite series ever. I'm so sorry. One of you is like, I'm not complaining. I feel like I've heard you talk about this in like every video as of late, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Because I know. But anyway, so I got some of the alternate covers for Volume 1. This is the Crunchyroll one. And then this one, I am probably going to mispronounce this. Kinokuniya is the company, and they had their own. And it came with this adorable little print of two of the characters as kids, but they're wearing their grown-up outfits, so it's too big for them. Sorry, none of you care. I just really love the series. I don't know if you knew, so I am quite a big fan of it, and I really liked these alternate covers for Volume 1, so I got them too. But anyway, that's it for this library saves, DNFs, unhaul, and haul. If you have any thoughts on anything I talked about today, feel free to mention those. This was obviously slightly more casual than usual, but I didn't say that at the beginning, so hopefully you didn't mind. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.